So if you saw what I said in the main stage, we're talking about human-centered product design. The premise is that we used to be in a seller-driven economy, which was a big company or any company could create a product, and through mass marketing and advertising, they could convince you to buy it because you didn't have many options. But now we live in a buyer-driven economy. With the internet, you can access the long tail of products. You can find any book you want on Amazon. You can find any pair of shoes you want on Zappos. You can find any product you want just by searching for it. So if we're going to create products, if we're going to build businesses around startups and we're going to bring things into the market, how can we be sure that we have a good idea that people will actually want to buy? Because now they have unlimited choice. And anyone who's ever built a company or built a product before knows that no idea can survive its first encounter with a real customer. So no matter how good you think your idea is, it probably needs to change somewhat in order to actually appeal to a market. So what we've done over the past 20 years is built dozens of products. We've launched multiple companies. And what we've found are these patterns of building products based on human-centered principles. So if any of you are familiar with design thinking or any of the things that come out of the Silicon Valley D schools about how to build products, it's kind of similar to that, but it's not a linear process. It's a much more iterative process. We break it down into 5 phases. The first phase is problem validation. If you see a problem, how do you validate that other people actually have that problem and that it's painful enough that they will pay for a solution? Then we have solution validation. Solution validation is coming up with ideas. That's asking the question of how might we. Then solution prototyping, solution validation, then brand and product strategy. So how do you position the product to be something people can actually understand and people want to buy? And then the final phase is actually building it, and building at scale, building at speed. So we're starting here with solution validation. Most people start with zero knowledge. So what you have to do is talk to as many people as possible. If you're starting here, you've not talked to anybody, you've not asked any questions, you know nothing. You have a lot of assumptions, but you have no validated ideas. You have nothing that actually proves that your idea is going to work. The tools that we use for that, we start with an empathy map. This is a tool that helps us understand what's going on in the mind of the customer. Through interviewing people, we understand what they see, what they say, what they do, and what they hear from their people around them. So what we want to do, and we'll get into this in more detail later, what we want to do with this is understand the customer, and then that helps us go to the value proposition canvas, which many of you are probably already familiar with, and that feeds into the business model canvas. And they all attach together something like this. One of the things that I want to dispel about talking to users is the idea of a persona. Personas are very narrow. I prefer to think about it in terms of actors and roles. So if you think about casting a movie, like James Bond has been played by 10 different people, but it's still the same role. Different actors can play that same role. And those actors have similar traits, they have similar behaviors, but they're not the same person. So much like casting a movie, you can choose who's going to play in which role, and the same person could actually play different roles if you wanted them to. So if we think about actors forming roles and then roles forming together to create a customer segment, we can have a much healthier and broader perspective of how to approach customer discovery. So when we talk about finding people to interview, we have to get very specific. So I'm going to breeze through this. We have to talk about demographics, psychographics, purchase behavior, interests and hobbies, and social behavior. What a lot of people do when they start to define their market is something like this. Women who have never been married, who are college educated, between 28 and 34 years old. And most people stop there. What you need to do is get a little bit more detailed. Maybe they live in this certain zip code, they have a household income under $75,000 a year, they're employed in a Fortune 1000 company, and they drive to work. So that's much more detailed, right? It's still not good enough. We know that they go less than 10 miles to work, they drive a German car, and they use an iPhone. And they listen to podcasts about creativity and art. They follow Martha Stewart on Facebook. They post to Instagram more than 5 times a week, mostly about their dog. And they buy their coffee at Starbucks. And they might have a tattoo that you will never see. So this level of detail is what's essential to understanding what motivates somebody to buy a product. And you don't have to go very specific about every person you talk to, but you want to understand those people as intimately as you can. So the way you do that, you have to get out of the building. You can't just stay in your office or in your co-working space and talk to the people around you. You have to go out into the world and talk to people. Hallway testing is a good way to get some quick feedback. That's basically where you go to any public space, you just grab people and you ask them if they have a certain problem or if they can identify with a challenge that you're facing. You can also use Craigslist or Facebook to do recruiting. You can hire a recruiting firm. This is not a staffing firm, but a company who is specially focused on hiring or finding people to interview. We recommend you do not use surveys, basically because on a survey, especially a written survey, people have time to edit their answers. So they're going to edit the answer to make it seem like the best answer for that question. When you're talking to somebody in person, their first response is genuinely better because it's more truthful. And it's always good to offer an incentive. So when you're talking to people, you don't want to ask very specific questions. You want to ask broad questions. And you're not trying to find a specific answer. The worst thing you can do is say, if this thing exists, would you buy it? Because most people will say yes. Some people will say no, but most people would say yes because they don't want to hurt your feelings. What you need to do is understand if they actually have the problem that you're trying to solve. Interviews go in 4 phases. There's icebreakers, stage setters, explorers, and refiners. I'll go through those pretty quickly. So icebreakers are things like, thank you for talking with me today. Can I get you a coffee or a water? Nice shoes. This is a good thing to compliment somebody to help build rapport with them. And always remember to smile. Stage setters. You say something like, I understand you are an architect, or I understand you are a student. You want to get them nodding their head. You want to get them agreeing with you because that helps build rapport and it helps them actually give you better answers later on. You tell them what you'd like to learn about. I'd like to learn about this particular challenge. You don't tell them that you're building a product. You don't tell them that you're doing research because you're going to sell them something later. You're just trying to understand a problem. You can introduce an assistant who's going to be taking notes, and then ask if you can record the conversation for later. Everybody who has a smartphone has the ability to record the conversation, and that's vital for later on when you go back and compare your notes to the recorded conversation so you can properly fill in the empathy map. Explorers start with things like, tell me about your typical day, what frustrates you most about this challenge or this task that you're trying to accomplish? What have you tried to solve it? Maybe they've already tried the thing that you want to build and it didn't work for them, so then you need to find out why. What do you think other people do is a very interesting question to ask people because it plays on psychology. People don't want to be judged for their own behavior, but they will gladly explain how somebody else would do it. So when you ask, what do you think other people do for this to solve this problem? They'll tell you what they would actually do because they can't put themselves in the mind of the other people. But they can then say it without judgment because they're not explaining their own behavior. And then how do you feel about this task or challenge? Now notice I'm not asking how do you think about it, but how do you feel about it? Because we want to understand people's emotions, because emotions are what drive purchasing behavior. Refiners are ways to explore a topic a little bit deeper. So when you hear them tell you how they might accomplish a task or a challenge they have, ask these kind of open-ended questions to get them to say what they just said again. So you start with something like, what do you mean by that? You might have understood exactly what they told you, but you want to get them to say it again so you can use different words to describe it. Tell me more about that is a great way to get them to open up and to explain more about something. Help me understand that better is a good way to put them in the position of helping you, which actually psychologically makes them like you more. And then you can say things like, what was that again? Even though you heard it clearly and it's being recorded, you want to get them to say things over again and to expand what they're telling you. The last is, here's what I heard you say. So you repeat back to them what they just told you, and they will correct you or modify what you say back to them so you can make sure that you get it the right way. So good questions are open-ended, never ask a yes-no question. They go from being very general to more specific. They get them telling a story. When you can get someone telling a story about the last time they tried something or the last time they were frustrated by something, that's where you'll find the real reasons that they would be motivated to buy a product. You don't lead the witness, so you don't ask them questions leading to an answer. And then finally, you avoid introducing your own bias. You know a lot about the thing that you want to build, and they don't. So it's very easy to explain something to them in the way that you think it should work or the way you think it should be solved, and that introduces a bias to them. All that's doing is hurting your research, because then you're going to get answers that confirm your own biases and not actually something that could be useful in the market. So to define customer segments, you can ask who handles the thing you're improving at your home or your office. Tell me about your role at the company. Tell me about your typical day. How much time do you spend on this task? This is a very interesting question because it helps you understand value, and when you understand value, you can understand pricing. You never want to ask somebody how much they would be willing to pay for something. You want to ask them about the value something would provide for them, and then pricing comes on at a later time. Problem discovery questions are things like, what are some of the unmet needs you have around this task? What product or service do you wish existed? What kind of tasks take up the most time in your day? Again, you're trying to get an idea of the value of solving this problem for them. What could be done to improve your experience? This is where somebody might tell you exactly what you need to build. You just need to ask them. Put it in a position so they can tell you. What is the hardest part about your job or hardest part about your role? Then problem discovery questions are things like, do you find it hard to do this thing? How important is this to you? Tell me about the last time you were doing this task, and listen for complaints, because complaints are the things that you want to solve. How motivated are you to solve or improve upon this problem? If they're highly motivated, that's going to drive more value, which gives you a better indication for pricing. And if you had a solution to this problem, what would it mean to you? Would it give you time back in your day? And what does that time do for you? Can you spend more time with your family? Could you do more things that you enjoy? Can you spend more time watching sports or doing something like that? So once you get through all of these questions and you've taken notes, you're going to start filling out the empathy map from earlier. So you've talked to all these people, you've got all these notes. You're going to, in the top column, you're going to say who you're empathizing with. Who is this person? What is their role? And then what do they need to do? Then what do they see? What do they say? What do they hear, and what do they do? And this, you're going to do this after you interview the person, because you need to go back through the notes to figure out where things go on this canvas. And then most importantly, what do they think and feel? What are their pains and their gains around this particular challenge? Pains and gains are important because you have to understand somebody's pain points to be able to address it, and gains are important because that's how you can demonstrate value. Once you've done an empathy map for every person that you've interviewed, you go through a process called affinity mapping. This is essentially where you take all of the things that you wrote down, you put them on Post-its, get them up on a board, and you start to find groupings. So you find similar thoughts and find similar patterns. And then from there, you can have these groups, and that's how you start to define the roles. Because you have people doing similar things or having similar thoughts about something puts them into a role together. So that's how you get actors who fall into roles. So then you take all of those roles together, and now you have a customer segment. Is that making sense so far? Everybody following? I know I'm moving really fast, and the slides will be available later. So then what you do is you take that customer segment, you take those roles, and you create another empathy map for the role. What are their pains and their gains? And then that's what goes into your value proposition canvas, because now you've defined your customer segment. You know the tasks they're trying to accomplish. You know the pains and the gains. So that's directly from the empathy map canvas. You know the pains and gains that they have. And then you can complete all of these. Then you can start to map that to a potential product. Once you've mapped that to a potential product, you've mapped out your gain creators and your pain relievers, then you can start to think about how you position the service to demonstrate those gain creators and pain relievers to that market segment. Then all of that goes into your business model canvas, and now you can start thinking about how you're actually going to build a company around this product. And again, that's how everything fits together. So now we're ready for phase 2, which is solution prototyping. A lot of people think that, there we go. A lot of people think that this is the standard process. This is kind of the design thinking process, right? Research, explore, design, and test. And it's a loop like this, and it always goes in this circle. But what needs to happen sometimes is you have to go back to the previous phase to refine things. So don't be afraid of having to go back. If you're designing something, maybe you need to explore a little bit more. Maybe you need to go back to your customer interviews. It's not necessarily a one-direction, like waterfall linear process. The most important thing to remember is that we need to be able to switch between being innovative and being creative and being analytical and optimizing things. We need to be able to switch between right brain and left brain behavior pretty consistently and pretty quickly in order to understand if we're on the right track and make sure that we're not going down a path that we can't get back from. So the first thing that we do, we start asking these how might we questions. How might we solve this problem for this person? So paper prototyping is a really powerful way to do that. It's very cheap, it's very easy, and it's very fast. So you can simply draw out what your application might look like, and then you can take something like this and you can go back to those customers and you can see what they think of it. You've not written a line of code. You've not spent hours and hours slaving over a screen. What you've done is created something that you can go back to the market and test. All you need is a whiteboard, some sticky notes, some printer paper, and some sketch pads. Maybe a bunch of Sharpies. The purpose is to discuss the elements and the content that are going to be in the application. You can begin defining priority and importance of various elements and content. So what needs to be on the screen at this step of the process? You can quickly play with different layouts and sizing of different elements, and you can see what works and what doesn't work. Then you can go to something that's a little bit more high fidelity. And then finally, you want to take it into a digital tool like Axure or Balsamiq or OmniGraffle. There's a lot of good tools that are out there where you can start to bring things into the digital world and see how they're going to respond on the screen. The purpose at that point is to define the basic layout, discuss the various states of elements, so what's actionable, what isn't actionable, where do you need input, how do things move. You can create something that's very simple very quickly. Then you go into high fidelity prototyping. Again, those tools, Axure, Sketch, InVision, Webflow, any of those tools are fine. You could even quickly prototype something with a tool like WordPress if you wanted to. The purpose at this point is defining fonts and colors and photos and all of the visual elements, making final decisions on appearance and functionality, and testing real workflows with real people. And it's also a great deliverable to the development team. So at that point, when you have a high-fidelity prototype, a developer knows exactly what color things should be and how things might move when you touch them. So it's a very powerful tool to be able to get people to understand exactly what needs to be built. This is a UI canvas that we use at the office where we have a bunch of different UI elements and we can prioritize which types of UI elements that we want to use. This is a great conversation starter. These are also available online. You can buy them, stick them in your office, and it's a great way to look at the way different things might work, and that's how you could help inform your high-fidelity prototypes. So eventually you have something that actually looks like an application, and you can move on from there. So it's a pretty detailed recap. So for sketches, which is rough wireboard things, it's just a simple way to get ideas out. Then you want to move up in fidelity of prototyping as you go, and go back and test with users at each level of fidelity. So it looks a lot like this. So you prototype something and you test it. You prototype something and you test it. And you prototype something and you test it. It's a continuous loop. So now we're moving on to solution validation, which solution prototyping and solution validation are the most iterative phases where you have to move back and forth between the two things. You have to creativity in solution prototyping and the analysis or optimization that you get in solution validation. So you test ideas. Again, remember, if you don't talk to people, you have zero knowledge. So types of tests you can do, hallway testing, you just go out into the hall and you find somebody, you show them what they're working on, and you ask them to accomplish a task with it. There's moderated testing where you're actually sitting in a room with a subject and you're watching them in person. Then there's remote moderated testing where you do the same thing but over screen share. There's remote unmoderated testing, so sites like usertesting.com, where you can put up a prototype and then they have people come and play with it without you directly observing. And then there's just automated testing. So there's a number of tools out there that can do automated tests on web applications, mobile applications, and so forth. Hallway testing is a good casual way to gather quick feedback, but the people around you are probably biased, because if they're working in your building, they may not have the problem that you're trying to solve. They may also be highly technical or highly tech-savvy people, and that might not be the audience that you're trying to serve. So just because the people are close to you, it does not mean that it's your customer segment. Moderated testing is good because it can provide an in-depth understanding of what's going on, but it can also be expensive because it requires you spend the exact amount of time with every person that you're testing with, or somebody on the team has to spend time with that, and it can become expensive and time-consuming. Remote testing is a little bit easier because you can get access to more people. You could test with somebody anywhere in the world, but you lose a certain amount of fidelity. Everybody knows that it's more effective to talk to somebody in person than to talk to somebody on a screen share. So you lose a certain amount of information that you can get from doing in-person testing. Unmoderated testing is good because it scales very well. So you can set up a test, you can send it out to a website, and you can get thousands and thousands of responses to that test very quickly without you having to participate in each one. But the test has to be designed very, very carefully, because you could easily introduce bias in a test, or you could actually skip the thing that is the most important part. So you have to do some in-person moderated testing first to understand how to design an unmoderated test. Same thing is true for automated testing. The good thing is once it's set up, it can just run for 24/7, and you can get some really good results back really quickly. So again, those tools are Acture and Vision. Ping Pong is a good tool to go and find people to interview and to test with. So you can go there, you can pay them some money, and they find people who fit the demographics and psychographics that you're looking for. Usability Hub, usertesting.com, and Quick MVP is actually a pretty good tool for building something very fast and seeing if people will actually respond to it. So the big question is, will they pay, right? Because if we're trying to build a business, we're not building a hobby, we're not building a charity, we want people to buy the product. So there are a few ways that we can validate product ideas. You can build a simple one-page website or a landing page, do email address capture, get some analytics from that, and then run a simple marketing campaign. So you might do something that looks like this. You have a landing line or one page or a quick MVP website, and you can run Facebook and Instagram ads, or you can run any kind of ads to drive traffic to that website. Then you want to capture their email address using a tool like MailChimp, and then Full Story and Google Analytics can tell you a lot about on-page behavior, bounce rates, all of those things. And you can test things again and again and again. So you can do A/B testing on different value propositions. You can do a lot of different things to see what is the most effective. So critically, what you want to do is explain what your product does very clearly and very concisely, and ideally directly addressing the pain points or the things that people stand to gain. So as an example, maybe we're building a taco delivery app. Everybody loves tacos, right? So we're building a taco delivery app. So what we want to do is say, this app will give you tacos in less than 5 minutes, because that's a direct pain point. I want tacos fast. I'm going to address that pain point very quickly and say, tacos delivered in less than 5 minutes. The brand doesn't matter, how the application works doesn't matter. You have to talk specifically to the value proposition. Highlight any USPs. What does this thing do better than another competitive product, or not doing anything at all? And address any key concerns people brought up during testing. So a key concern for a taco app might be how payments work or privacy or something like that. So address those things further down the page to make sure that you're eliminating any hesitation or any negative feelings that somebody might have about the app. And then always have a direct call to action. Not something that says click here. You want to say something like order now, download now, something that is actually action-oriented. So running a campaign. So you remember the psychographics from earlier, the girl who might have a tattoo that you'll never see? So we want to use as much of that information as possible to build a highly targeted audience. So knowing that they follow Martha Stewart on Facebook, knowing that they post on Instagram about their dog, you can use that information to highly target people who have those same behavioral characteristics and have those same needs. Then you want to drive them to the page, and you want to make the audience as narrow as possible. It's okay if you're only advertising to 1,000 people because you're just trying to test an idea. A lot of people think that they need to advertise to hundreds of thousands of people because they want to get a lot of information fast. In this case, you want quality information, not quantity of information. So plan to spend a few $100s on ads somewhere and measure the results. So remember, this was the person that we're trying to talk to. So the things that you want to measure are the bounce rate. This is the first signal of whether or not you have something that's good or bad. Do people see it quickly and then just leave? Or do they actually take some time to read the page? On-page activity. Did they scroll? Did they click something? Did they try to click something that looked like it was clickable but wasn't? Do they move their mouse over certain bits of content? A lot of people will subconsciously move their mouse to the area that they're focusing on. So you can actually use that mouse behavior to see what information that they're looking at, or maybe what information that they're looking for. Obviously conversion, how many people signed up, how many people gave you their email address. And if you have sales, you want to segment that out by anything that you can. So geography is obviously good, but you can also use the metrics from the advertising campaign that you used and click all the way through, and you can set up goals in your analytics platform so that you know who actually did the conversion and what demographics and psychographics are now attached to that new email address. And then there's the what we call afterglow, which is the ratio of actions after the initial call to action. So after they give you the email address, if you provide them something else to do, more content to read, maybe it's a social share, maybe it's something else that you ask them to do, if they do those things, they're more likely to have affinity for the product. Okay, so now what? So you've done all of these things. You can also just replace all that stuff with manual labor. You don't need a lot of tools. You can just go out and build things manually. So doing things manually gives you direct contact with your customers. You can find critical issues with your process much faster because you're actually talking to people. You can quickly and easily see what can be automated, and there's zero development costs. There's a friend of mine who built a company in the US. It's a marketing analytics. What they do is they look at what you're currently spending, and they analyze all of your campaigns, and then they give you feedback on how you can optimize those campaigns to get the same results for less money. They built all of this. They built a fancy website that explained all the value proposition and made it look like it was this automated service. And then when you signed up for the service and gave them access to your reporting, they manually put it into Excel and ran a bunch of spreadsheets and did a bunch of things manually and generated the report and sent it back to people. They did that manually for about 3 months. What that enabled them to do was see what worked and what didn't work, what people's responses were to the output, and they could easily see what could be automated. They started building macros in Excel. They started building simple little automations or simple things that helped the process go faster, and then that gave them a direct idea for what code they needed to write first to actually build a piece of software. So when you're doing things manually, document as much as possible. Use something like Zendesk to track customer requests. Talk to your customers as often as possible. Set up a forum. What I recommend doing is set up a VIP forum. I wouldn't call it something like a beta test or something like along those lines. I would call it a customer VIP forum where you can invite people in and have them talk about your product, and you can talk about the product with them. That's the greatest way to get feedback fast and easy. Other resources you can use. So for tasks, you can things like Fiverr or Upwork or Thumbtack. If you need graphics, you can use something like 99 Designs. For content, there's a service called Scripted that has a bunch of people who just write content for you. And then development, there's things like TopTal or TopCoder. There's actually a company here, Brain Trust, who's just starting up, who might be a good option to look at too. So again, we're going back to this continuous improvement. So we prototype something, we build something, but we're always testing. We're always getting feedback from our target market. So phase 4, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on brand and product strategy. I just want to get a highlight about how to think about the brand and what the general process is. So a brand, this is the oldest known brand. It was a Mesopotamian bottle cap from around 3000 BC. This was the first time that somebody actually put a name on a product so customers could associate that product with its characteristics, and its quality. So people, when they went to market, they would look for this bottle cap, and they would know that that was, I think it was maybe olive oil or wine or something. Then a lot of people think about branding like branding cattle or branding livestock. This was a way for people to determine their property, and also it was a signal of quality or a signal of characteristics when that livestock went to market. So the origin of brand goes very far back, and unfortunately, this makes people think that the brand is a logo. The brand is not a logo, a brand is not a name. That stuff, it matters, but not as much as what a real brand is. A brand exists at the intersection of what you do and how people feel about it. Or as Jeff Bezos says, the brand is what people say about you when you're not in a room. The brand is not the logo. The logo is just a visual bookmark so you can identify that brand. But a brand is the relationship that you have with those customers. To demonstrate that, back, I think this was in, 1982. Tylenol, which is one of the most trusted brands in America, somebody in the factory started putting cyanide in the medicine, and 5 people died. And so Tylenol went from being one of the most trusted brands in America to being one of the most feared brands in America overnight. The name didn't change, the logo didn't change, the marketing didn't change, nothing changed except for the product and just for a few people. By and large, the product was fine, but people stopped buying Tylenol and it took them years to recover. So even though the brand, the name and the logo stayed the same, people stopped buying the product because they no longer trusted it. So if we think about the way brands communicate, so brands used to just blast out their message to the world and would hope it would connect with the right customer. Now we can have a little bit more of a direct relationship because brands can target specific customers. They know your buying habits. They can find a way to advertise to you on any social media platform. But then there's also this conversation that's happening. People are talking to their friends and they're exchanging information about products and services. And the brand wants to be a part of that. So now we can have this large communication with large groups of people in forums where the brand can talk to large numbers of people at the same time, and those people can talk to each other. This is part of what the internet has given us that wasn't available before. And so because of that, companies now have the obligation to understand what their customers are thinking and feeling, and that's the only way they'll be able to build products that are actually relevant and important to them. So the process of, now that you have this product, you have to name it, you have to come up with a company name, you have to come up with a logo and all of this. So the first thing that you have to do is develop a brand ethos. That's developing the brand personality. What would your brand be like if it walked into the room? So you personify the brand. Are they wearing a suit or are they wearing a swimsuit? Are they tall? Are they short? How do they talk? How do they carry themselves? There's a lot of personal traits that you need to identify in that brand. Different brands have different personalities, and that relates to different types of people. So remember, a brand exists at the intersection of what you do and how people feel about it. So now, moving on to the final phase. There we go. So how do you get something that's the idea into an actual application? Especially an application that works across a bunch of different types of devices. This is the device landscape of a couple years ago. It hasn't gotten any better. So if you're going to build a mobile app and you're going to build it for Android and iPhone, you have to deal with a lot of different screen sizes. You have to deal with a lot of different issues around connectivity. There's a lot of things to consider. So when we think about an MVP, most people think about this. Is something feasible? Is it valuable? Is it usable? Is it delightful? And most people think the MVP is just building something that's feasible. But to build an MVP, you have to build something that actually hits on all 4 quadrants. So you have to build something that is valuable to the person, that actually delivers some type of value for them, and most importantly, it has to be delightful. Delight is what gets somebody telling somebody else about the application. Delight is that little bit of joy that an application can bring when you use it. It's little things like the Zappos mobile app. When you log in as a VIP, it has all of these VIP badges that rain down from the top of the screen. When you add a product to your cart, it has a little cat in a parachute that floats down to the cart. It's little touches like that that make people enjoy using the product. Maybe a better illustration of what an MVP is it's helping somebody solve the problem. It's actually accomplishing the task in the easiest possible form. So if you want to build a car, you don't start with a wheel and go try to sell the wheel to the car. It won't work. The problem that you're actually solving is helping people get from place to place. So maybe a skateboard is the easiest way to do that, and then you can upgrade to a scooter, and then a bike, and then so on. So the principle to remember is you want to help somebody accomplish the task completely, not part of it, but accomplish the task completely. So we think about the team who's going to build this product. Typically, we have a product owner. That could be the founder. Any of these people could be the founder. You've got a product owner, you've got designers, you've got developers. And traditionally what happens is developers and designers have parallel work streams, and then they'll share information back and forth. So if we think, if anyone uses something like GitHub and you look at the commit history, you kind of see how things fork off and then they merge back in. This is kind of the same thing that happens between designers and developers. Is a designer will go over here and build something, and they'll hand it to the developer, and the developer will start doing something. And it's not a very collaborative process. There's lots of room for things to break down. So what we want to do is get everyone using the same brain. So if everyone thinks alike and everyone has the same set of truth, then the product is going to be better. So we do that by using a common language. And if we think about the way the design side of the house works and the way the development side of the house works, it's actually very similar. On the code side, we start with code, and then the code goes into frameworks, frameworks build systems, and systems build applications, and that eventually goes into the product. On the visual design side, we have something very similar. We have visual elements, things like buttons, things like text. Those things go together to make components, like the navigation or a particular screen for doing input or looking at products. Those things go into systems, and that ultimately builds the application. So the overlap is actually quite high. The way that we think about products being built is using this atomic design pattern. So we start with atoms, which are very small things like a button. Atoms and other things come together to make a molecule. A molecule could be like a call to action area where you might have a bit of text and a button next to it. Molecules form together to make organisms. Organisms are things like the global navigation or a particular part of the application where you're interfacing with data. And then those things go into templates and ultimately pages. So the atomic design pattern makes it easy for both designers and developers to talk about things in a common language. When we think about the way the application gets built, so we start in something like Sketch. We create an Envision prototype. Through inspect mode and Envision prototype, you can get all the information about the visual, the way all the visuals are composed, so a developer can understand that easier. You can use a design system. So all of the tools go into the design system, and then through design tokens, which is essentially variables that a developer can pull in that for things like color or font sizes, for things of that nature, so the developer can be focusing on how the application functions, and the designer can be focusing on how the application looks. All of those things flow together into a common design system. So back to this. We can go through these loops, and we can go back and forth very easily, switching from our creative brain to our analytical brain. And we have to do that very quickly, and we have to do that very frequently. Again, this is a much more iterative approach. We design and we test. We develop and we test. We design and we test. And we develop and we test. And that test could be some automated test. It could be going back to users and showing them a prototype of something. But we have to go back and make sure that we're validating things with the people who will be using it, with the people that we're trying to build value for. So a healthy design operation essentially values people and the interactions over the processes and tools that you're going to follow. It responds to change over following a plan. So if somebody says, this button is too big, or I don't understand how this thing works, you should be able to respond to that very quickly. And design systems and healthy design operations enable you to do that. They emphasize collaboration with customers, and they stay focused on the problem they're solving, not the way they think they need to solve it. They fall in love with the problem, not fall in love with the solution. And they always encourage constructive critique. So this was that typical process. This is a much better process. where the teams are intertwined and working together. And this is the best process because it involves the customer and it centers around the customer. So if you involve that customer in the entire development cycle, you will definitely end up with a better process. So design operations collaborate on solving problems. They believe in evidence-based decision-making based on testing with real people. Communicate effectively between the design and development sides of the organization, and publicly measure progress and hold each other accountable for the quality of the product. And lastly, relentlessly listen to customers. Always be testing with people. I can't emphasize that enough. So going back to the very beginning, if we remember where our empathy maps feed into our value proposition canvas feeds into our business model canvas. That's how we think about building the company. And probably the most important thing to remember is that we want to find as much of an overlap between the user's goals, between the goals of the customer, and the goals of the business. That's the designer's job. That's the developer's job. We make that overlap as big as possible, and that's how we capture value for both sides. Continuous improvement. And remember that understanding what people want and designing something that is delightful for them is the single most effective way to build a successful business. So if all of this is interesting to you and you'd like to learn more, I have a book that's coming out later this year. So you can go to that URL, put in your email address, and you'll get a discount for when the book comes out. And that's all I have. Thank you. If you would like to download the slides, they're available at bit.ly/human-centered. So you can go download the slides. They're already online right now. So if you want to go and download the slides, feel free to email me, find me online, find me here if you have questions, you want to talk further about this. Again, thank you.